Maybe you heard how ChatGPT and AI are going to take our jobs.
They took our job!
And maybe you already use it for school or work. I strongly believe AI and similar technology will change the way we do literally everything. And this includes how we train and study jujitsu.
Jiu-Jitsu? I'm going to learn Jiu-Jitsu.
Now, don't get me wrong, it's not going to replace your coach, training partners, and time spent on the mat actually training, but it's going to augment your training. Just like instructionals and YouTube are just another tool you can use to help get better faster.
Upgrades.
I've been messing with these AI chatbots since they've been released for Jiu-Jitsu, and honestly, sometimes it's really useful, but oftentimes it's really lacking. This is especially true when you ask it questions about specific Jiu-Jitsu techniques and details, and you ask for other specific facts. You'll see what I'm talking about later in this video when I show you some of the crazy shit it says. I'm going to explain how these things work, why they often don't work, and why I think they're only going to get so much better. If you're not already familiar with me, my name's Sean. I'm a BJJ black belt, software engineer, and a founder of the BJJ education app, Digitsu. So if you use ChatGPT, you notice there's different models. There's like 3.5, there's 4, there's 4 Omni. With these models, you can just think of them as different versions of the chatbot, and there's different trade-offs with depending on which one you use. Some, for instance, 3.5 is super fast but cheap. For Omni, the quality results is better, but it's a little slower and more expensive. But over time, the general trend is that these things are getting better. And each one of these models, they're built from different data sources. These are things like websites and books. They have a ton of information about language that they help use to predict and answer your questions. So we have our model that's built from different data sources. The next component here is our prompt. This is basically your question you ask the chatbot. So here's the thing that's really cool about this. It doesn't just take your prompt and then give a response, like your whole answer at once. It uses the model and the data sources that are used to build that model and your prompt or your question. And the only thing it's doing one step at a time is just getting the next character in response. So given that, it might say C. And given all of that and so far the response it has, it might say A. And then it might say M. Then it might say P and so on. And it just keeps going until you get your entire response or answer here.
Sometimes I'll start a sentence and I don't even know where it's going. I just hope I find it along the way.
The one thing that's really cool about all these models, they actually know a lot about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu already. You have to ask your questions in a way that it knows that it's about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. This is no different than how you would Google things. So it's not like rocket science or anything. The only thing we have to do here is say, what is camping in BJJ? Then when you change the prompt, say in BJJ, then you get a response that would probably make more sense in the context of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. This sort of thing where you try to find the right prompt to get the right response you want is simply called prompt engineering, as like a fancy name people gave it. But think of it as just like Googling. It's like when you try to think of the right thing to Google to get the answer you're looking for. With that whole Google comparison here, I just want to mention why these things are better than Googling. Basically, you can ask your question and then you get your answer directly. You don't have to like go through ads and go through websites, and the websites have ads to find the answer you're looking for. They can give you the answer right away without any of that stuff. It may seem obvious, but if the data sources aren't good for these models, then you're not going to get a good answer. For instance, if it didn't know about camping in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you're not going to get an answer where it's going to tell you that. That's why these companies, they've been going after things like Reddit, like YouTube, to get all good data so that they can answer questions about as many things as possible. And it's not just the amount of information, it wants quality information, like well-organized, validated information. In a weird way, I know there's a lot of junk on Reddit and stuff, but there is an upvote feature that can filter a lot of the noise. And this is true of things like Quora as well, where you can upvote good answers and they get kind of validated that way. You might have even heard the expression, data is the new oil. Well, that's what they mean by this.
I drink your milkshake.
Another limitation with these models is that they have a fixed date from which they were built. When they got their data sources, it takes a bunch of computation, it builds these things. So with that, when you use them, you have to be aware that it's not going to have context of current events. For instance, if we asked it about CJI, you're probably going to get an answer that's not going to be relevant. With that all being said, there are versions of these chatbots that will do searches to get the latest information. ChatGPT even has this feature and will search the internet sometimes for new information. Well, here's a popular one I like to use called Perplexity AI. I'm going to put the link in the description here, but we can ask it that question we asked earlier. What is camping in BJJ? We can ask the question here. And you can see how there's these sources here. It's Googled all sorts of YouTube videos here and include them here in the result. And You get a bunch of details and links to different sources. So I've been using ChatGPT since it was first released, and when it first came out, I was asking it a bunch of jujitsu questions, and honestly, some of the answers were freaking crazy, but it's gotten a lot better over the last year, honestly. And now if you go to openai.com, you can use it for free, actually. As we talked about earlier, there's those different models. You have unlimited access to 3.5 right here, which is like the really fast, less accurate version. And then the most current version for Omni, you have limited usage and you generally get better answers, but it's a little bit slower. So with that all being said, we have ChatGPT 3.5 opened up here, and we're just going to start asking it some questions. So I mentioned earlier, it probably won't know about the Craig Jones Grappling Invitational, but I think this is a good question to ask because it highlights another limitation these systems have. So what's really interesting about this answer here, it basically is just giving you steps and instructions of how you just enter any other tournament. So this is an important concept I want to explain here, where it's basically as it's predicting characters to rate, it gives you answers and things that it thinks are most likely to be true. So in some cases, it might make things up essentially, and these are called hallucinations.
This isn't real.
What is real?
These are effectively things that it thinks look correct, but they're not necessarily true. So that's why you have to be very careful using these things, especially when you're looking things up you don't know. It might just make things up on the fly, basically. A good type of question to ask would just be like what you might ask your coach, just broad questions of what you're dealing with in your game. For instance, a very common problem I've heard is simply, how do I escape side control? And we'll add in BJJ for additional context. So you notice we ask kind of a broad question, how do I escape side control? We get kind of a broad answer here. There's maintain frame or framing, obviously regain guard, but kind of shrimping, recovering, getting an underhook. You can escape the turtle, and then just like use timing and explosiveness, practice drill, stay calm and patient. ChatGPT loves this, like telling you to stay calm and patient when you ask it these technical questions.
Patience. Patience, my love.
That's a general idea, but we can get more specific from there. For example, let's say, what's a good underhook escape? Now, notice something about this. I didn't say in BJJ. I didn't even say side control because that's another feature of these things. They remember your history. They remember the previous questions and answers. As long as it doesn't get too long, eventually they might forget things from quite a while ago. But that's the general idea. I can just simply ask, what's a good underhook escape? So now we get like a more specific answer here where it's talking about, establishing the underhook, creating space, shrimping, turning to your side, and then recovering from there. It's not getting like super specific with details though. Like it just says, establish an underhook. It doesn't tell you about how you should go about doing that. And then it doesn't even really tell you exactly like how to establish a better position or to recover guard. You basically turn to your side and then it kind of happens. And then it kind of gives this like basic, generic information where it's like drill and practice. It didn't say stay patient again, but it's a general idea. So now they illustrate the difference between the different models. We're now in for Omni, which is the latest version, and we're just going to ask that same question again. And I added the context that it's in BJJ because it's a new chat, so it doesn't have that history. So now we have a much more detailed answer here. If we go back and look at it, it actually breaks things down more step to step, and it's a lot less vague. For instance, it defines the near and far side arm. It tells you where to put your frames first, which to my mind is more accurate. It tells you to get to your side right after that, as opposed to one of the later steps. Then it kind of tells you how to insert your underhook from here. Basically to how to use your far arm and how to slide it under the armpit, and it gets like more detailed from there. It also tells you, where you should aim, ideally around their back or belt area. And then it tells you how to create some space, and then it actually tells you to get to the knees here. And then it explains like what a better position is and how to translate to it, like whether that's, I don't know, taking the back or coming up for a single leg or then falling back to basically regain guard from there. Then it explains some more details of like mistakes to avoid, like protect your neck, things like that. Then it explains some kind of the idea of drills. I mean, it's all text, it's all kind of vague, but you get a much more detailed step-by-step answer, which is actually more accurate. So I switched back to 3.5 because I want to show you another limitation these systems have. It's easier for me to show you on the older version. The new versions still have this issue, but it's a lot more common in the older model. And the question I have here is, how can I use my right arm to pass deep half guard when my right leg is trapped? So pretty much, how do I pass deep half when my right leg is trapped? And what do I do with my right arm? So with this answer, we got a lot of kind of generic advice, very similar to before here. But then what part we're really interested in here is kind of like the details, because we gave it a very specific scenario here where my right leg is trapped, therefore my right arm's going to be on top. What do I do with that arm to pass here? And there's some very specific advice here. It says control the upper body. Use your right arm to control your opponent's upper body. This can be done by gripping the collar, grabbing the far lapel, and securing an underhook under their near arm. Normally, if you're in half guard and you think near arm, we would typically think of that being the near side underhook. But in this case, it's a little confusing. And honestly, I think it's probably the incorrect way to say it. You'd probably say you would go for the far side underhook on this case. And this isn't even the worst offense, but it's situations like this where it really struggles, where you're asking it about a specific scenario, kind of like in 3D in a specific position. And oftentimes it gets things wrong because this is not how these things work. They're not building a 3D model, they're not like visualizing it necessarily how we're doing it. It's just predicting words that seem to make the most sense along the way. So that's just another thing to watch out for when you describe very specific scenarios. Just be mindful that it could give you the wrong information. But again, this is on 3.5. The latest models are actually a lot better at this sort of problem. Another common type of question I've asked this sort of thing is questions about specific data and history, and you get mixed results with this sort of thing. For example, let's ask it something like this. What is the highest percentage submission in ADCC grappling events before 2004? What? Okay. So this is definitely not correct here. It's saying that Ricardo Arona before 2004 has the highest submission percentage or submission rate at 100%. It also says he submitted all his opponents in the 88-kilogram division, and it's considered one of the most dominant performances in ADCC history. Well, I can tell you right away that's complete bullshit.
All bullshit. All of it.
I love Ricardo Arona, especially back in the day when he competed in Pride. But if we look, he was mainly known for his physicality and his wrestling, less so for his submissions. For instance, if we look down at his record here in 2001, he had a ton of matches. He won. He won absolute. He won the 99 kilo division, not 88. And he only has a single submission. The rest were by points and penalties and things. So this is another case of that like hallucination thing we talked about earlier. So one of these things these systems are missing right now is really organized data around Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. All right, now let's ask it a big question here. Let's ask it if it can help me be a Craig Jones Invitational champion. So here we asked the question, we gave it a ton of context here. How can I become a Craig Jones Invitational champion? We defined it because it might not know it in the history like we talked about earlier. And we're going to send this through. So if we look at the answer we got here, we got kind of a general outline of the things we need to do to become a champion here. It says train with top coaches, focus on technique and conditioning, compete regularly, win ADCC, compete in IBJJF, win the world championships, have a network of grappling community and social media presence, engage the online community, sponsors, and so on. So actually, I don't think this is a bad answer, but I think what's missing here, it actually doesn't know anything about me.
Don't you know who I am?
If I had a coach in real life, they would know this stuff. Or if I was asking some other person online, they would be like, how old are you? Like, what have you done previously? Like, where are you along this path it kind of outlined? So that's a general limitation with these things. Not only does it not know everything about you, but it won't even ask you for more information if it doesn't have it. So for instance, it didn't stop and be like, wait, how old are you? Like, what's your current situation? It just goes forward and gives you the best answer it can with the information it has. Another limitation it has, sometimes it tends to be on the optimistic side. For example, we could ask it something like, we can ask it, what if I'm a 76-year-old who hasn't played a sport in their lives? So it gave me a really similar answer before. It added some stuff about like health and safety, and it said it would be extremely challenging, which is true. But honestly, if you had any coach in real life and you're in that state, they would tell you, sorry, buddy, you're out of luck.
Approximately 3,720 to 1.
Never tell me the odds.
So just be aware of that. It'll give you answers for anything, but if it says something in there like extremely challenging, it basically means impossible. So as we were using ChatGPT to ask jujitsu questions, you notice there's all sorts of limitations and problems we ran into. But even with all these problems, there's many ways to solve them, and there's a lot of ways to make this technology better for jujitsu. This is the reason why in Digitsu we launched a BJJ chatbot earlier this year to help solve some of these problems. For example, it knows you're going to ask questions related to jujitsu, and it uses all sorts of data sources. For example, all the Digitsu videos it knows about, and it also uses YouTube and other websites as well. And you can use it for free. It's available right now on digitsu.com. If you just go on their website, there should be a link in the header if it doesn't show up right away. And the way this works, you just kind of ask a question just like ChatGPT. You can type it in. There's also suggested questions here. They randomly change, but you can just click on any of those as well. So what's really cool about this is that you get, really detailed answers here from different sort of videos. For instance, I have distinct bullet points for the leg bundle twist sweep here. And you can actually click and go to this video. And it'll go right to the video in the Digitsu catalog. Although for the videos, you have to either be a subscriber or own the content basically, because they're like considered premium content. But that's not all the content, honestly. These are all Digitsu videos that it used to answer the question here. But if you look, there's multiple sources and pages of sources here. For instance, here we have like a blog article, on reverse half guard that helped use to answer. There's also a video here from YouTube here for the John Wayne sweep, for example, from Sean Williams. Also, if you look, it provides follow-up questions related to the original question you asked. So you can just click on any of these here. Are there any variations or combinations of these sweeps that work well together? You can just tap on that. And here, you notice we get different kind of combinations and variations that work well together. For example, there's a deep half series that includes different techniques. And we notice we have some other sources here. In this case, it's mostly external sources, not necessarily Jiu-Jitsu related. And another cool feature you can copy the link so you can share your question and answer with other people. And you can basically upvote or downvote whether you like the response or not. So it's still early. This thing's going to get a lot better, but I still think it's better than just regular ChatGPT if you have jujitsu related questions, because it has that additional context and it has the additional sources that ChatGPT does not have. I also have to say thank you to my friend Waseem, fellow software engineer. He helped build the Digitsu chatbot, and without him, it never would have happened. Well over a year ago, he built the first BJJ AI chatbot I've ever seen called GrappleGPT. If you're interested in AI, tech, jujitsu, please follow him on social. I'll make sure to include that as well in the description. So to summarize, I think it's useful as a general tool and can save a little bit of time compared to, say, Googling something. We also talked a lot about the limitations it has currently, like things related to recent events, things where it doesn't have enough context about you and your unique situation, advanced like jujitsu techniques that are kind of hard to map out, and then also specific stats related to jujitsu. With that all being said, I'm confident that systems like this will continue to only get better. Each one of the problems we talked about can and will be solved. The chatbots themselves will use Google and internet searches to get better, more real-time information. They'll know more about you and your specific history and where you are in your jujitsu journey. They'll have more and better organized data related to jujitsu. And the models themselves that are used underneath all of these things are only going to get much, much better. For example, a GPT-5 is said to have a PhD level of intelligence. And as we talked about, these things predict text and they predict the next character that's coming in. I believe long term, we'll start to see more of this technology used in 3D, which can help solve some of the problems with predicting complex jujitsu positions. But anyway, that's just my opinion. Let me know your thoughts, and thanks for watching.